Hello Daily Drafters and welcome to the Streets of New Capenna set review video. Neon Dynasty is in the rearview mirror and it's now time to strike up some deals with the mobsters of New Capenna. This video will cover everything you need to know to prepare for your first draft of the new set when it releases on MTG Arena on Thursday, April the 28th. We do set review season a little differently here at Daily Draft, but don't worry, it will all make sense as we get going. Before we hop into the set review content, I'd love for you to support the channel by hitting that subscribe button and sharing the video with a friend. Set review season requires a lot of time and effort to get you the content that I know you're looking for, and a quick subscribe will go a long way in making it all worth it. With that out of the way, the first thing you need to know about Streets of New Capenna is that this is a set based around 5 different trios of color combinations. Usually in Limited, there are 10 viable 2-color pairs that each have their own identity. But in New Capenna, we really only have slight variations on 5 different decks. So let's dive into what those decks will be. First, we have the Cabaretti family, represented by the 3-color trio of red, green, and white. The Cabaretti are a fun-loving cult of druids who throw the hottest parties in town. They are also the glitterati of the city, and they use magic to sway the opinions of the city's inhabitants. Next up is the Maestros, represented by the 3-color trio of blue, black, and red. The Maestros are made up largely of old money vampires, and they love opulence and the finer things in life. In public, they present themselves as lovers and patrons of the arts, but they operate as elite assassins behind the scenes. Next are the Brokers, represented by the 3-color trio of green, white, and blue. The Brokers maintain public law offices in New Capenna, which they use as a front for their shadier affairs. The demonic lawyers are also driven by their belief in a doomsday prophecy. Next are the Riveteers, represented by the 3-color trio of black, red, and green. The Riveteers are destruction workers, master artisans, who are just as good at destroying as they are at creating. The Riveteers are known to be rowdy and use brute force to get their way. They have crafted the Undercity into a lair worthy of their draconic leader. And lastly, we have the Obscura, represented by the 3-color trio of white, blue, and black. The Obscura are described as powerful wizards and mystics that use their powers to deceive and blackmail. They maintain a veneer of an ordinary life when in public, while they work behind the scenes to manipulate every situation to their advantage. Now, you might be wondering how it's going to be possible to focus your efforts on drafting a 3-color deck when the majority of Limited formats focus heavily on 2-color decks. I've made a rough sketch of how I think the majority of drafts in Streets of New Capenna will go. If you notice, the way that I have arranged each of the families in this wheel is so that each family borders another family that shares 2 of its 3 colors. For example, the Maestros at the top of your screen share blue and black, with the Obscura going clockwise. Likewise, the Obscura share blue and white with the Brokers, and so on and so forth. These commonalities in colors are what we call the allied color pairs in Magic. On your screen now, you will see each of the 5 color pairs that will be the focus of this set. What you will likely want to do when drafting Streets of New Capenna is to start as one of these 5 allied color pairs, then feel out which of the 2 families that it branches off of is the most open, and then pair some of the best multicolor cards of that family as a splash. This will likely lead to a much more successful and consistent draft experience for you throughout the life of this format. Lastly, before we jump into each family individually, let's take a look at the fixing that will facilitate these 3-color decks. I've now replaced each of the families and the 2-color pairs with lands that are in New Capenna and are printed at common. Each family receives an Evolving Wilds variant, as shown here with Maestro's Theater, which says that whenever it enters the battlefield, you must sacrifice it. You may then search your library for a basic island, swamp, or mountain, put it onto the battlefield tapped, shuffle, and then gain 1 life. In addition, each of the allied color pairs gets a dual land like Waterfront District here that enters the battlefield tapped, taps for either blue or black, and then you can pay a blue, black, and 2 generic mana and tap and sacrifice this land to draw a card. The presence of these 10 lands at common should make splashing around to achieve these 3-color decks fairly easy. Now that we've covered all of the attributes of New Capenna that make it unique from other formats, let's do a deep dive on each of the 5 families so that you know what you're getting yourself into when you end up drafting them. As a quick reminder that here at Daily Draft, rather than give a card-by-card analysis for each and every card in the set, we build what are called archetype skeletons. These skeletons can be a valuable resource for determining what each of the viable decks in the format might look like prior to your first drafts of the set. Now, obviously, we won't get everything correct, and these skeletons should be used for the first few drafts of the set for you. As the format evolves and we learn more about the cards in the set and how they interact with each other, the skeletons will evolve as well. But hopefully, these provide a good baseline for you to begin the format. I've gone ahead and restricted myself to 2 rares or mythic rares, 5 uncommons, and 16 commons per deck, as these are the average number of cards at each rarity that have been included in each of the 81 drafts on the channel thus far. If it doesn't quite make sense just yet, don't worry, I'll make it easy to follow along. We'll begin with the Cabaretti, represented by the color trio of red, green, and white. The signpost mechanic for the Cabaretti is Alliance. Alliance is a keyword that appears on various creatures in the set and triggers whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control. In Celebrity Fencer's case, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Celebrity Fencer whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, a very powerful effect. Let's start by taking a look at the 1-drops for the deck. We will start here with Cabaretti Initiate, which is a 1/2 that you can pay some extra mana into to give it double strike until end of turn. Every aggro deck needs a couple of good 1-drops, and this seems like a decent one for this deck here. Next up is a combat trick in For the Family, which for a single green mana can give your creature +2/+2 or +4/+4 if you have 4 or more creatures. Now, I'm a bit suspect of this one because Massive Might was a card in a recent set that also gave Trample, and I think that's going to perform a lot better because it gives Trample, but I still think this one has the ability to be even better than Giant Growth, which is a decent enough card. Our last 1-drop is Rafine's Guidance, which is an aura that can give +1/+1, but you can also cast it from your graveyard by paying 2 and a white instead. So this is a recurable way to make some of the smaller creatures in this deck get a little bit bigger, and I think it's going to be an important inclusion to make sure that your creatures can match with some of the bigger ones on the other side of the battlefield. Our first 2-drop is Attended Socialite, which is 2 mana for a 2/1 that has Alliance that whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. I've included 2 copies of it in this deck, mainly because it features Alliance so prominently. I don't actually think this is going to be one of the better cards. I struggled to find some of the really good aggressive 2-drops in this deck, but I think including one of these is not going to be the end of the world in most of your Cabaretti decks. Next is Civic Gardener, which is a 2 mana 2/2 that can untap a creature or a land whenever it attacks. Again, it's not one of the better 2-drops in the format, and maybe I need to be looking at red for the 2-drops in the Cabaretti deck as opposed to green or white, because I didn't find the best ones here. But you're going to need a high density of 2-drops if you want the Cabaretti deck to be at all successful. Next, we've got Civil Servant, which is a 2 mana 2/3 that whenever it attacks, you can tap another untapped citizen you control to give it +1/+0 and lifelink until end of turn. In Cabaretti, there seems to be a little bit of a citizen sub-theme, as proven here by Civil Servant, and this card has the ability to be a 2 mana 3/3 lifelinker on attacks if you're willing to tap another citizen, which is a very good 2-drop. Next, we've got our first rare in Gala Greeters, which is a 2 mana 1/1, but it has the Alliance trigger, where you can put a 1/1 counter on it, you can create a tapped treasure token, or gain 2 life. So this features Alliance very prominently. It has a great modality of whatever you need to choose in the moment. It reminds me a bit of Kami of Transience from the previous set in a way, because you're going to be able to trigger this very effectively. It's going to be a very, very good 2-drop and a good aggressive 2-drop for the Cabaretti family. Our last 2-drop is Prize Fight, which is this format's fight spell for green. It's 2 mana. You can have your creature fight a creature that you don't control. You also get a treasure token. I think this particular fight spell is going to be the worst in this deck because most of our creatures are going to be relatively small, so fighting as opposed to biting is not going to be exactly where we want to be, but it's still a good enough removal spell that green gets, so we're going to have to include it here. Our first 3-drop for the deck is Cabaretti Charm, and these charms are a cycle, one for each of the families, and each of the 3 modes you can choose from kind of represent one of the 3 colors in the family's representative colors. So for this one, you can either bite a creature, you can give all your team +1/+1 and trample, or you can create a couple of tokens, and these charms are going to be a great inclusion in any of the family's decks, no matter which one you choose. Next is one of my early picks for best white common in the set, which is Inspiring Overseers, a 3 mana 2/1 flyer that gains you a life and draws you a card when it enters the battlefield. It doesn't have a ton of synergy with all the families. It's just a rawly powerful card you're not really going to want to cut. Next is Jewel Thief, which is a 3 mana 3/3 with Vigilance, Trample, and creates a treasure token on ETB. Centaur Courser has certainly gotten an upgrade, and this one is also at common, so we're going to slam as many of these in basically every green deck in the format as we can get. Our second rare is Ginny Fey Jetmir's Second, which has a confusing mana cost in a Gruul hybrid, a green, and a Selesnya hybrid for a 3/3 that you can create different kinds of tokens depending on what you choose. You can create some dogs or cats, 2/2 cats or 3/1 dogs with vigilance or haste, depending on how many tokens you're able to create from other sources. So this deck is going to be pretty good at creating tokens. We just saw the charm earlier, and Ginny Fey will be able to turn all those tokens into creatures that you can use even better. We've also got Mage's Attendant, which is a 3-mana 3/2 that comes with 2 bodies, and that second body can threaten to counter one of your opponent's spells as well for a single generic mana by sacrificing it. The fact that you get 2 alliance triggers off of this is going to be huge, and this is just going to be a really, really good uncommon in the format. Our last kind of 3-drop is Rocco Cabaretti Caterer, which has 1 of each of the Cabaretti colors of mana and X for a 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you may search your library for a creature card with mana value X or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This is a great way to trigger Alliance as well. If you cast this for 4 mana, you can go grab a 1-drop, 5 mana, you can grab a 2-drop, and it gives you 2 bodies from your deck for a single card, which is going to be huge in the Alliance-based decks. Our first 4-drop is Celebrity Fencer, and you've already seen this one, so I've included 2 copies of it here. Being able to put a +1/+1 counter on this thing after each creature enters the battlefield under your control can get out of hand very quickly. Next is Darling of the Masses, which is a 4-mana 2/4 that gives your other citizens +1/+0, and when it attacks, can create a 1/1 creature, which can also trigger your other alliance triggers on basically instant speed in the middle of attacks, which is very, very powerful for a 4-drop. You're noticing a theme here with these creatures that we want to get as many alliance triggers as we can and creatures that can create multiple creatures with just 1 card. Next is Elegant Entourage, which is a 4-mana 4/4 at its baseline, which is great, but it has an alliance trigger that can give another creature other than itself +1/+1 and trample until end of turn. And I think the trample is going to be super important in a deck like this to push through those last little bits of damage. Our first 5-drop is Rakish Revelers, which for 5 mana is a 5/3. I've included 2 of them here because when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1. So again, you get 2 bodies for 1 card. This is also a cycle. Each family has one of these that has this bottom line of text where you can pay 2 to exile it from your hand and give a land the ability to tap for any color of the family's colors, and then you can cast from exile as well. So these cards are going to be super, super important to help your fixing for the colors, and they're also just very good cards within your colors. Our last card for the deck is Speakeasy Server, which is a 5-mana 3/3 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life for each other creature you control. This is going to be a go wide deck, and ideally you'll have a lot of creatures on the battlefield. A 5-mana 3/3 flyer is not too bad of a body to help you give a little bit more reach to push through that last little bit of damage. The Cabaretti certainly look to be an aggressive deck in the format, and with such aggressively slanted creatures and an ability keyword as strong as Alliance, I think aggro should be well represented. Next are the Maestros, represented by the color trio of blue, black, and red. The signpost mechanic for the Maestros is Casualty. Casualty is a keyword that appears on various creatures in the set and triggers whenever you cast a spell with Casualty. In the case of Dig Up the Body, if you sacrifice a creature with 1 or greater power when you cast this spell, you get to copy the effect. It will be interesting trying to balance whether or not it's worth sacrificing creatures to double the effect of some of your spells, but let's see if we can put together a deck here that can maximize the Casualty keyword. The first 1-drop for the deck I've included here is Cutthroat Contender, which is a 1-mana 1/1 that you can pay 1 life to give it +1/+0 until end of turn, but only once each turn. So this is a decent little 1-drop that you can threaten to trade with some 2-drops for, but I've also included it because you're going to need some cheap 1-power creatures you want to sacrifice to some of your Casualty 1 cards, and this can easily be one of those creatures. Next up is Expendable Lackey, and I've got 2 copies of this 1-mana 1/1 here because from your graveyard you can exile this for 2 mana to make a 1/1 blue fish creature token that can't be blocked but only as a sorcery. So this is a great card to sacrifice because when it's in your graveyard you can then pay 2 mana to bring back another 1/1 that you can then use to sacrifice to more Casualty cards. And our last 1-drop I've got here is Grisly Sigil, which is a 1 mana for a sorcery and has Casualty 1. You can choose target creature or planeswalker, and if it was dealt non-combat damage this turn, it deals 3 damage to it and you gain 3 life. Otherwise, it deals 1 damage to it and you gain 1 life. But if you sacrifice that 1-power creature, This could be 1 mana, deal 6, gain 6, which is an enormous upside for a card. And its fail case is 1 mana, deal 1, gain 1 to something for just 1 mana, which is not bad. You can also casualty that to make that 2 mana, or 1 mana to deal 2 and gain 2, which is also pretty good. Our first 2-drop is 2 copies of Body Dropper, which for a black and a red is a 2/2, and whenever you sacrifice another creature, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this. You can also pay a black and a red to sacrifice another creature to give it menace until end of turn. So with casualty, ideally you're going to be sacrificing creatures every now and then to various casualty cards, and when you do that, this just gets counters. You can also, this is also sacrifice outlet itself, where you can pay a black and a red to give this menace by sacrificing another creature as well. So we're going to need lots of expendable sacrifice creatures, and this one seems like a pretty good payoff for that. Our next 2-drop is 2 copies of Corrupt Court Official, which is a 2 mana 1/1 that makes your opponent discard a card when it enters the battlefield. Virus Beetle is back, baby, except this time it's not an artifact. However, it's going to be a great casualty 1 target. It's already a 2-for-1, and if you can actually sacrifice this card to another casualty 1 card, then you're going to get basically a 3-for-1 out of this, and that's really, really good for a common. Our last 2-drop is Light 'em Up, which is 2 mana to deal 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker with casualty 2. So effectively you can sacrifice basically a 2-drop, or in some cases a 1-drop if it's got 2 power, to then deal 2 damage to another creature. So you can basically trade your worst creature for one of their creatures in addition to getting the original effect of the spell, which is going to be a great removal spell in the format. Our first 3-drop is Corpse Appraiser, which is a bit of a difficult to cast 3/3, but when it ATBs, you get to exile a creature card from a graveyard, and then if you do, you get to look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard, which is exactly what this deck wants to be doing. It's going to be a 3 mana 3/3 just with upside, and that's very good. Next is Maestro's Charm, and this charm gives you a little bit of a selection while dumping some cards into your graveyard, can drain your opponent for 3, or deal 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker, all things that blue, black, and red are looking to do. Next up is Maestro's Initiate, which is a 3 mana 3/1 that you can pay 5 mana to exile it from your graveyard to draw 2 cards, then discard a card. At common, this just seems like decent value, and we're going to go ahead and include a copy of it here. Next up is 2 copies of Murder at common. Murder's one of the best removal spells we've seen at common in a long time. 3 mana, kill target creature. We'll include 2 copies of it here. Next is our first rare, or mythic rare, in Obnixilis the Adversary. It's a 3 mana planeswalker that enters with 3 loyalty counters. And it has casualty X, where the copy isn't legendary and it has a starting loyalty X. So you can sacrifice any creature to get another copy of it. And then it has various planeswalkers abilities that you can go ahead and read for yourself. Yeah, this has casualty on it. It's exactly what this deck wants to be doing. It's a great mythic rare planeswalker, and we'll be happy to include it here. And our last 3-drop is Rooftop Nuisance, which has casualty 1, and it taps target creature. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step, and you get to draw a card. This is really good tempo for the Maestro's deck, because each of these 3 colors are looking to stall out the game and get a little bit more value. You can draw 2 cards off of this card if you're willing to sacrifice a 1-powered creature. Our first 4-drop is a copy of Deal Gone Bad, which gives target creature -3/-3 until end of turn at instant speed, and target player mills 3 cards. It's a decently efficient removal spell, and mills yourself, ideally, for 3, because in black in this format, I think milling yourself is going to be an advantage. Next we have Forge Boss, which is a 4 mana 3/4 that whenever you sacrifice 1 or more other creatures, it deals 2 damage to each opponent that only triggers once each turn. Well, casualty is sacrificing other creatures, and a 4 mana 3/4 body that can just ping your opponent for anywhere between maybe 2 to 6 damage over the course of the game is going to be a pretty good card. Our second rare for the deck is Reservoir Kraken, which is a 4 mana 6/6 with Trample and Ward 2, and if that was it, then that would be great, but it's not. At the beginning of combat, if it's untapped, any opponent may tap an untapped creature they control, and if they do, you have to tap this and create a 1/1 fish that can't be blocked. So ideally, it's a 4 mana 6/6 that can really threaten your opponent. Obviously, if they can't afford to tap creatures down to tap this down, but even if they do, they give you some casualty fodder in 1/1s, and if you don't want to sacrifice those 1/1s, over the course of the game, these fish can't be blocked. So they're just going to keep on getting in and causing a problem for your opponent. Next is Run Out of Town, which for 4 mana is an instant that allows you to put target non-land permanent on the top or bottom of your opponent's library, but they do get to choose top or bottom. So this is like I think it's strictly better than Totally Lost, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to be a pretty good removal spell in blue, and one of the best they're going to get. Our last 4-drop is Sleep with the Fishes, which is a pacifism variant, but when it enters the battlefield, you get to make one of those 1/1 blue fish creature tokens that can't be blocked, and then the creature that you enchant doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. This is a pretty good version of this type of effect in blue, and the fact that you also get that fish means it can be casualty fodder if you want it to be, and also the fact that these can't be blocked. Again, this damage is going to add up if you can get enough of these fish. Next we have Glamorous Outlaw, which is a 6-mana 4/5 that when it enters the battlefield it deals 2 damage to each opponent and you scry 2, and it has the same text that the Cabaretti one did at the bottom where you can exile it and then make a land tap for blue, black, or red and then cast it from exile as well. So we're going to be including one of these in basically every single one of the family's decks in the format. And our last card for the deck is Join the Maestros, which is a 5-mana 4/3 Ogre Warrior creature token that has casualty 2, so you can sacrifice a creature with power 2 or greater to turn that creature into a 4/3. It's basically just a 5-mana 4/3 that you can upgrade one of your other creatures with, but there seems to be some combo potential with this in the format. The Maestros will certainly function as the grindy value deck in the format, and that deck has been very hit or miss lately. I think if you're able to effectively spin your gears in Maestros, it could be a really fun and potent time. Next are the Brokers, represented by the color trio of green, white, and blue. The signpost mechanic for the Brokers is less of a mechanic and more tactile in the form of shield counters. Shield counters allow you to remove themselves if a creature were to be destroyed or take damage. Disciplined Duelist here is a simple 3-mana 2/1 with double strike, but it does enter the battlefield with a shield counter on it, a noticeable upgrade. It might be difficult to build an entire deck around shield counters, but they certainly are powerful. Let's check out the deck I was able to construct here for the Brokers. I was unable to find any 1-drops for the deck, so we start here with Backstreet Bruiser, which is a 2-mana 3/3 with Defender, but as long as there are 2 or more counters among creatures you control, it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. Counters include shield counters, so in the Broker's deck, ideally this will be a 2-mana 3/3 that can attack and block most of the time. Next up is Backup Agent, which is a 2-mana 1/1, but when it enters the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So at the baseline, it's a 2-mana 2/2. Part of that is a +1/+1 counter. It does count as a counter for other creatures in the deck that care about that. Broker's Veteran is a 2-mana 2/1 that when it dies, you get to put a shield counter on target creature you control. I've included 2 copies of this in here because, again, we need a high density of 2-drops. This seems like a pretty good one for the deck that also comes with shield counters when it dies. Next up is Prize Fight, and for 2 mana, this is the fight spell in green for the format, and because of shield counters, I think including 2 copies of it here in the Broker's deck is going to be pretty valuable because when you fight for that first time, if it has a shield counter on it, your creature will not die, but theirs will, which is a very good upgrade. And our last 2-drop is Revelation of Power, which is a 2-mana instant combat trick that gives a creature +2/+2 until end of turn, but if it has a counter on it, it also gains flying and lifelink. So ideally, again, shield counters. If it has a shield counter, if it has a +1/+1 counter, any of those sorts of things, it gets flying and lifelink and +2/+2 for 2 mana, which is a great deal. Our first 3-drop is Broker's Charm. Again, in the Charm cycle, this one allows you to have target creature you control get +1/+0 until end of turn, and then it deals damage to an opposing creature. So it's not a fight, it's a bite. You can also destroy target enchantment or draw 2 cards. This flexibility for 3 mana is great. Next up is Celestial Regulator, which is a 3-mana 2/3 flyer at common, and when it enters the battlefield, choose target creature you don't control and tap it. If you control a creature with a counter on it, the chosen creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. 3-mana 2/3 flyer is already a great deal, and this upside, if you happen to have a creature with a counter on it, and again, in Brokers you should, is a really, really strong upside. So I've included 2 copies here. Next is the card you've already seen in Disciplined Duelist, a 3-mana 2/1 with double strike and enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it. Remember, first strike damage is dealt before regular damage, so if you happen to kill an X2 before damage is dealt, the shield counter isn't even removed. This is a pretty good creature, especially if you're able to get it buffed in any way. Next up is Inspiring Overseer, and then I've included 2 copies here as well because a 3-mana 2/1 flyer draw a card, gain a life is something that you're going to want in basically every white deck in the format. Same thing goes with Jewel Thief. We've got the 3-mana 3/3 Vigilance Trample Make a Treasure token as well. We're going to slam a copy of that in this deck as well. Our last 3-drop is Wing Shield Agent, which is a 3-mana 2/3, and when it enters the battlefield you get a shield counter, and when it attacks, up to 1 other target creature gains flying until end of turn. This is a really good aggressive 3-drop. We've seen this effect before, usually in white, but this effect is better than it looks, and when this one comes in with a shield counter as well, it's a pretty good uncommon in the format. Our first 4-drop is Dapper Shieldmate, which is a 4-mana 2/2 that enters the battlefield with a shield counter, and as long as it's your turn, it gets +2/+0. So it attacks as a 4/2 that the first time it's dealt damage or destroyed, you get to remove that shield counter. So this is a very good aggressive 4-drop for this deck. Our first rare or mythic for the deck is Falco Spara, which is a 4-mana 3/3 flying trample creature. It enters the battlefield with a shield counter. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast spells from the top of your library by removing a counter from a creature you control in addition to paying their other costs. So with all these shield counters running around, or even +1/+1 counters, or other various counters, Falco Spara acts as a mythic rare in the format. It's going to let you cast cards off the top of your library, which is a great effect. Next up is Metropolis Angel, which is a 4-mana 3/1 flyer, and whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures with counters on them, draw a card. So this one doesn't actually come in with a counter, but ideally you're going to have counters floating around everywhere else, and whenever you attack with one of those creatures, 1 or more of those creatures, you get to draw a card, and that's the 3 best words in Magic. We've also got a copy of Run Out of Town here, which lets you put target non-land permanent on the top or bottom of your opponent's library. They do get to choose, but again, it's one of the better removal spells in blue. Not even a great removal spell overall, but blue doesn't get great removal, and this is going to have to do. Our last 4-drop is Voice of the Vermin, which is a 4-mana 2/2 that enters the battlefield with a shield counter, and whenever it attacks, target creature you control has base power and toughness 4/4 until end of turn. So it attacks as a 4/4 with a shield counter. You can also hold this back with a shield counter and give other creatures, maybe a flyer or something, base power and toughness 4/4, and which is going to be great. You do have to attack with it though, but it does give that that bonus of having that shield counter, so it can survive at least 1 combat. Spara's Adjudicators is the cycle version for brokers here. For 5 mana 4/4, when it enters the battlefield, target creature and opponent controls can't attack or block until your next turn, and it has the same text that the rest of the cards in this cycle do. We're going to go ahead and include one of these in this deck as well, just as we will with the rest of the families in the format. We do have a 6-drop here in the brokers, and I'm going to go ahead and include a copy of Rock's Pummeler. 6 mana 6/3 enters the battlefield with a shield counter, and it has trample as long as it has a shield counter. So that shield counter is going to go a long way in pushing through some extra damage. It does have a small amount of toughness, but that first attack that you get it in, let's say they just throw a 1/1 in front of it, the shield counter will get removed, but they will still take 5, and then you'll still have a 6/3 left on the battlefield. Our last card for the brokers, and also our second rare or mythic in the deck, is Sanctuary Warden, a 6 mana 5/5 flyer that enters with 2 shield counters. And when it enters or attacks, you may remove a counter from a creature or planeswalker you control, and if you do, draw a card and make a 1/1. Not much to say about this. This is exactly what this deck wants to do. Very powerful, flashy mythic rare, and you're going to be happy to include it in any broker's deck you could find it in. The brokers seem to have a little less synergy than the other families, but their cards certainly are rawly powerful. We just saw the green-black deck in Neon Dynasty have a similar identity and end up as one of the best decks in the format. So let's see if the brokers can strike a similar chord. Next are the Riveteers, represented by the color trio of black, red, and green. The signpost mechanic for the Riveteers is Blitz. Blitz is a keyword that acts as an alternate cost for a card. When you cast a creature using its Blitz cost, that creature gains haste, and you must sacrifice it at the beginning of your end step, and when this creature dies, you get to draw a card. Kind of like a similar temporary effect, but you do get the card back in the deal. If we take a look at Chaldea Strongarm here, it acts as a 5 mana 2/3 that can distribute 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control when it enters, or you can blitz it for 4 mana to give it haste, still get those counters, and lose it on your end step. Let's see if we can put together a strong Riveteers deck maximizing the corner cases of Blitz. We will go ahead and begin by adding 2 copies of Strangle, which is 1 mana sorcery at common, deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Hard to argue with such an efficient removal spell as this. Next, we've got 2 copies of Body Dropper as well, just like we did in the other deck here, because you, at the end of your blitz, at the end of your turn, it does count as sacrificing that creature. So whenever you sacrifice a creature, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Body Dropper. There's also a sacrifice outlet on this if you wanted to go ahead and pay in addition to the blitz to get that extra card, get the menace, get the counter, all those things. This card can be a house in the Riveteers deck. Next is a copy of Fake Your Own Death, which is a 2-mana combat trick that gives the creature +2/+0, and when it dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under your control, and you get to create a treasure token. So ideally, the blitz costs on creatures are a little bit cheaper. You get to put those creatures in, and then you can use this combat trick to make it trade for something. It dies, it draws a card, it comes back to the battlefield, all for just an extra 2 mana here. So this card could be pretty good in this deck. Next is a copy of Mayhem Patrol, which is a 2-mana 1/2 with Menace, and whenever it attacks, target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and it has Blitz for 1 and a red. So it's effectively a 2-mana 2/2 Menace on attacks, but you could distribute that wealth elsewhere if you wanted to, and because it has Blitz, we're going to go ahead and throw it in the 2-drop slot here. Our last 2-drop is Riveteers Initiate, which is a 2-mana 2/2, and you can pay 2 mana to give it Death Touch until end of turn. It's not great, but we do need a high density of 2-drops, and we're going to go ahead and include this one here. Our first 3-drop for the deck will be High Rise Sawjack, which is a 3-mana 2/3 at common. It has Reach, and whenever it blocks a creature with flying, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. These sorts of decks typically need some protection against flyers because they don't usually have a lot themselves, and High Rise Sawjack can provide just that for us. Next up is 2 copies of Jewel Thief, and you're probably getting tired of this card, but guess what? It's great, especially because the color combination of red and green in this format seem to have a little bit of a treasure theme going on as well, and the fact that this creates a treasure in this deck just takes it to the extra mile. Next is 2 copies of Murder, and there's not much more to say about that. Our first rare is Riveteers Ascendancy, which for a black, a red, and a green, it's an enchantment at rare. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, you may return target creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, but only once each turn. So again, because Blitz makes you sacrifice those creatures, you can do some pretty crazy loops with this card. And our last 3-drop is Riveteers Charm. This one lets you choose between target opponents sacrificing a creature or planeswalker they control with the highest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. It can also let you exile the top 3 cards of your library and play them until the end of your next end step, or you can exile target player's graveyard. So the final option is probably going to be the least chosen here, but it's the Riveteers Charm. It's a great uncommon for the deck, and we're going to go ahead and slap it in. Our first 4-drop is Capenna Express, which for 4 mana is a 6/6 vehicle at common. It has crew 3, but you can also sacrifice a treasure to crew it. And because red-green has a bit of a treasure sub-theme, I think this card could be a serious house if you have enough treasure makers. This deck will also include a copy of Forge Boss because once again, at the end of your turn, sacrificing these creatures to the Blitz ability will deal 2 extra damage to your opponent with the Forge Boss in play. Mr. Orfeo the Boulder is a 4-mana 2/4 that says whenever you attack, double target creature's power until end of turn. This is just a pretty good card by itself. It attacks as a 4/4, but again, you can spread that wealth out throughout other creatures if you need to. If you have a flyer or a trampler, doubling that creature's power can go a long way. Our second rare is Ognis, the Dragon's Lash, which for 1, a Rakdos hybrid, a red, and a Gruul hybrid, is a 3/3 with haste, and it says whenever a creature you control with haste attacks, create a tapped treasure token. So this operates on both axes that this deck is trying to work on. It creates treasures, and the Blitz ability gives creatures haste. So whenever you attack with those creatures, this will trigger. This is going to be a great addition to Riveteers decks. Next we have Security Rocks, which is a 4-mana 5/4 that you can pay a red and a green to cast if you cast it only using treasures. Again, the red-green deck in this format, or the red-green color pair, is focused around treasures, so casting a 2-mana 5/4 seems insane. Our first 5-drop is the card you've already seen in Kaldaya Strongarm. It's a 5-mana 2/3 that enters the battlefield to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature, but you can blitz it for 4. So if you blitz this in and have a decent attack with it, put the counters elsewhere, you get to keep those counters even after this dies. Then we have Girder Goons, which is a 5-mana 4/4 with Blitz for 4. And when it dies, you create a tapped 2/2 black rogue creature token. So this could effectively be a 4-mana 4/4 haste that dies into a 2/2 and draws you a card at the end of your turn. And at common, that seems pretty powerful. We then have Pugnacious Pugilist, which for 5 mana is a 4/4. And whenever it attacks, you create a tapped and attacking 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. You can also blitz it for 4 mana. So it's a 5-mana 4/4, which is a bit underrated, obviously. It's probably going to have attacks most of the time, and when it does, you get to create one of those devils. And even if you want to blitz it in, again, you get that card back, you get the devil, you get to attack for 4. This deck could be pretty aggressive. Our last card for Riveteers is Masked Bandits, which is a 6-mana 5/5 Vigilance Menace and has the same text as the other creatures in this cycle here at the bottom, the same fixing text. This is a 6-mana 5/5 Vigilance Menace, and that alone is not bad for a common, and the fact that you can use this to help fix your mana is only a plus. Blitz looks to be an aggressive mechanic, but I think there's room to have it act as a value mechanic too. Sacrificing these creatures for value, drawing extra cards, getting ETB effects, the Riveteers could end up competing on a similar axis as the Maestros. Lastly, we have the Obscura, represented by the color trio of white, blue, and black. The signpost mechanic for the Obscura is Connive. Whenever a creature is instructed to connive, you simply draw a card, then discard a card. However, with Connive, if you discard a non-land card, that creature gets a +1/+1 counter. In the case of Rafine's Informant here, it's a simple 2-mana 2/1 that has the ability to be a 3/2 if you're willing to pitch a non-land card to its Connive ability to give it the +1/+1 counter. This color combination is notorious for its ability to control the game, so let's see if that's what the Obscura are looking to do here on New Capenna. Our first card for the deck here is Hypnotic Grifter, which for 1 mana is a 1/2 that you can pay 3 mana to have it connive. Notice that you don't have to tap the creature to activate this ability, so late in the game, if you have a ton of mana laying around, this is a decent way to just filter through your deck to find what you need. Our first rare is Aven Heartstabber, which for a blue and a black is a 1/1 flyer, but as long as there are 5 or more mana value among cards in your graveyard, it gets +2/+2 and has Death Touch. Also, when it dies, you get to mill 2 cards and then draw a card. So this ability of having 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard is a bit of a sub-theme here in the Obscura that you'll notice about, but Connive helps you set that up very well. When you draw a card, you can then discard a card to put it into your graveyard and add to that ability of having 5 or more. Remember, lands do count as 0, so you technically only really need 4 different if you're able to pitch a land into the graveyard. Next is the card you've already seen in Rafine's Informant. 2-mana 2/1, when it enters the battlefield, it connives. This is a decent little card for the deck, and because we're controlling, we don't need a ton of 2-drops, but this one could even threaten to trade with a 3-drop. Then we have 2 copies of Snooping Newsy, which for a blue and a black is a 2/2 at common. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 2 cards, and it has the same text of 5 or more mana value in your graveyard, and if you meet that condition, it gets +1/+1 and has lifelink. It's not the greatest payoff for the 5 or more cards in the graveyard, but it's a 2-mana 2/2. It does enable the 5 mana or greater in the number of cards in the graveyard by milling for 2, and the payoff is decent enough. Our first 3-drop here will be Dig Up the Body, which has Casualty 1 if you want to copy it, but it mills 2 cards, then you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is going to be great in the Obscura deck because you're already dumping non-lands to the Connive ability if you want to be getting those +1/+1 counters. Next up is 2 copies of Inspiring Overseer, and just like the other decks, there's not much of a reason to not include as many of these as you can get. Next is a copy of Killshot, which for 3 mana destroys target attacking creature. This deck is looking to be a little bit more controlling, and Killshot is a decent or unconditional removal spell as long as the creature's attacking you. And once again, we will be including 2 copies of Murder in just about every black deck we can get in the format until proven otherwise. Next we have Nimble Larcenist, which is a 3-mana 2/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand, you choose an artifact, instant, or sorcery card from it, and exile that card. 3-mana 2/1 flyer, a little bit underrated, but it's a straight up 2-for-1 if your opponent has any of those artifacts, instants, or sorcery cards in their hands, and you get to look at their entire hand. This is going to be a great card in Obscura. Next up is the Obscura Charm, and this one lets you choose between returning target multicolored permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. You can counter an instant or sorcery spell, or destroy target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. All of these are great abilities to have on a modal card like this. This very well might be the best charm in the set. Next, we finish the Initiate cycle with what is likely the best Initiate out there. It's a 3-mana 2/2 flyer that can gain lifelink until end of turn if you pump a little extra mana into it. 3-mana 2/2 flyer is usually decent enough in most formats, and this one being able to gain lifelink can go a long way. Our first 4-drop is 2 copies of Deal Gone Bad, which gives target creature -3/-3 until end of turn at instant speed, and lets target player mill 3 cards. In this deck, with the sub-theme of wanting 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard, milling 3 is going to be an active upside to a removal spell. Echo Inspector is a 4-mana 2/3 flyer at common that connives when it enters the battlefield. So a 4-mana 3/4 flyer, if you're willing to pitch a non-land card to it, is a great deal. And the other rare for this deck will be Obscura Interceptor. It's a 4-mana 3/1 with flash and lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, it connives, and when it connives this way, return up to 1 target spell to its owner's hand. So a spell is a spell that is on the stack, not necessarily one that has resolved. That's the reason it has flash here. So you can go ahead and basically divide by 0 for those familiar with Strixhaven, a spell on the stack, while also getting a 3/1 lifelinking body, which is a great deal. Quasar, Augur of Agonies is a 4-mana 3/4 that whenever you draw a card, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This triggers on every single one of your upkeeps, and ideally with Connive, you'll be doing this multiple times a turn and then draining your opponent every time you do so. This deck will also run a copy of Run Out of Town, which, as I mentioned before, is not the most efficient removal spell in the world, but when you run blue, it's about all you can have access to if you can't find the murders or other removal spells that you would prefer. Our first 5-drop is Psychic Pickpocket, which is a 5-mana 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield, it connives. When it connives this way, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So it could be a 5-mana 4/3 if you're willing to pitch the non-land card to it, but even a 5-mana 3/2 bounce a creature is going to be pretty good. That's usually you get this effect at common, but the fact that this is uncommon means it's going to be very, very good in this deck. Next we have Sewer Crocodile, which is a 6-mana 4/6, and you can pay 4 mana to have it not be blocked this turn, but it could be just 1 mana if there are 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard. I'm not completely sold on this card. One of the main reasons I included it is because it's a 6-drop and it adds to that amount of mana values among cards in your graveyard if you do happen to mill it. But if it only costs 1 mana, it's just 1 mana deal 4 every single turn, and that is a very fast clock. And our last card for the Obscura is Shattered Seraph, which is a 7-mana 4/4 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life, and it has the same fixing text that the rest of the cards in this cycle do. This is a decent little top of the curve here. 7-mana 4/4 flyer is obviously overcosted, but it has the ability to fix your mana, which is going to be super, super important in this format. The Obscura certainly do look to be the control police of the format. There's a lot of control cards that I didn't necessarily even include in this skeleton, but Connive should allow you to find just what you need whenever you need it. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of this video if you're still here. I know it was a long one, but I think it'll be very beneficial to have all of this information in one place so that you have an easy way to find what you need if you wish to revisit the video throughout the week. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to share it with a friend or two, as there's a decent chance they might as well. If you're already subscribed to the channel, thanks so much for being here today, and if you're not, go ahead and click that subscribe button to stay on top of preview season and have access to consistent high-quality drafts as soon as the set launches on Arena. Looks like that'll do it for this video, and I'll see you next time here at Daily Draft.